it really is just a tie into Hebrews 3, but I can kind of understand it, but to me it wouldn't be necessary, but because 3 is short. 3 only goes 19 verses, and then this one's even shorter than that. And I think this one is only 16 verses. So I'm not quite sure why the break occurs here yet. I think I will find out here as we go forward some more. But in my precursory study of this, it's really the subject of this whole kind of first part of the chapter 4 is God's promise still stands, right? And that's because if God makes a promise, like we said before, he was talking about when his wrath started. When did God's wrath start? Well, when does God's wrath ever stop? Well, you can't ever say that God starts or stops anything because he just is, right? God is present tense. He's not past tense or future. So when we talk about God making a promise, when does his promise ever stop? Hi. Stacy made it. Good. When does his promise ever stop? Well, like never, right? Because it always was. So when we read Hebrews chapter 4, therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard didn't profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Now that's kind of a catchy turn of phrase there, and we're going to look at that tonight just a little bit. We're not going to go that far, but we are going to reference that section. So you get this kind of feeling that he focuses on, they shall not enter my rest, they shall not enter my rest, they shall not enter my rest. But over in verse 7, it says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Why is he mixing all of this kind of idea? So the first part of this passage is about the promise of God's rest and what that means for us. So we're going to look at this as we always do. We're going to take apart verse 1 and really look at it. I was looking at a couple of commentaries, and verse 1 has a lot of commentary. Wow, I couldn't believe how much exposition occurred on this verse. There's a lot of expounding on verse 4:1, and to me, it's a little bit more straightforward than that, right? A lot of times when I read when there's a lot of commentary on something, it's because the verse is kind of deep and got multiple layers and it's complex and all the rest. To me, this is pretty straightforward, but the commentators really seem to love this verse. And that's okay. I mean, I'll tell you right now, MacArthur has 4 pages on this verse. So yeah, I was rather, overwhelmed by it, but it's okay. So let's take a look at it, because we get this kind of weird grammatical structure, and you probably have a different even reading of this from the translation that I just read. I don't know what your translation says, but this one says, therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short. Now, therefore is always like referencing what happened before. So before it was like of these unbelievers, we should be afraid. But really that's not the entire understanding of this, right? And that's why the New King James has it a little bit different. The New King James says, therefore, since a promise remains. They don't really try to point back to what has already been said in the past. We should fear. If you see how they've kind of rephrased it here, therefore, and then you could cut out since the promise remains of entering his rest. That's what we would call a parenthetical, right? It's parenthetical note right in there, not necessarily needed to make sense of the sentence. You could read it, therefore, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. That's added in there to help understand it, but not necessarily needed. That being said, it wouldn't be there if we didn't need it either. But I'm just using a grammatical structure. And why I'm saying that is because we need to connect fear with this idea of falling short, right? That's where the connection needs to be made. So our fear should derive from what seems, right? In other words, we should be afraid lest any of you seem to have come short of it, right? I'm not trying to play word games here. I'm literally explaining to you that this is what that is pointing towards, right? We should fear, therefore. Our fear should derive from this idea that any of you seem to have come short of it. What does that mean? Well, it means we should be afraid. I'm not going to say of what, but we should be afraid. Well, that's squeaky. Due to our own behavior. So you could say that we are afraid of our own behavior. That's what this verse is saying. So what should we be afraid of? Our own behavior. Because a lot of people, and that's why I say it's important that we read this correctly, because a lot of people want to point the finger. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it, right? So it's like you're pointing the finger, but really, you're not writing this. You're not the author of this. He's pointing the finger at you, at us, right? But everybody else wants to read this as though they wrote it, right? Well, who wrote it? God wrote it. So this is God telling us, you, right? But a lot of people want to step into God's place and get in the pulpit and tell everybody, hey, you are falling short. You need to be afraid because you're falling short. Man, that is together. You need to sit and read this as though he's talking to you, right? Lest any of you are falling short. Unfortunately, I sadly have the job of having to read this and point it out to you. Believe me, as I'm reading this to you, I'm the one who also wrote, due to our own behavior. So I know that it's an introspective statement, right? And that's a very important point.
Is it as much disbelief as it is behavior?
No, it's not even that. It's actual behavior here. When it says fear of any of you coming short of it, we're going to talk about what that means, because everybody wants to think short. Like, I think everybody thinks like shooting at a target, right? And then the arrow falls short of the target. Well, this is a little bit different than that, because this is has a greater meaning than that. So it's actually behavior, how you live your life. And we're going to talk about it. It's not just unbelief. It's that if your life shows certain things, it shows that you don't believe because you've given up.
Much like that little guy that sits on your shoulder.
Sure. Yeah.
You know that wasn't right, Ron.
Yeah. Yes. Conscience. Sure. But this is the real catch here. We live in a world of things that people are afraid of all the time, right? But we should be afraid due to our own behavior, but no one looks at that. Who's afraid of their own behavior?
Oh, I am.
But are we really? If we were afraid of our own behavior, we wouldn't sin. Right? Like, that's the big point that he's making here. Like, people are afraid of getting hit by a car. People are afraid of, the climate change. People are afraid of whatever diversity or wokeness or whatever, or all this nonsense and drama. They're afraid of all of the other things, but they're not afraid of their own behavior. And that's the one thing that we're being warned about right here that's going to keep us out of, right? And like the one thing that's going to keep you out of heaven, and people aren't afraid of that at all.
He was probably listening to me on the way to the doctor's office this morning. Going down 41. You crazy people.
Yeah.
You put that thing on the side of the column so you can tell me when you're turning.
Right, yeah. Turn signal, yeah. So, Yeah, but you guys were in the same traffic jam, huh? So we should be afraid of this. But as a general rule, nobody is. Nobody's afraid of their own behavior. They don't think that the actions that they take today are going to have any kind of implication. And like you said, they don't even see it in traffic. They think that if I cut this person off, I'm going to be 5 minutes ahead or whatever. Well, they don't think about the lineup that they've caused behind them, right? They don't think about their own behavior. No one is. No one is. And as this world goes forward, this is going to become less and less. They're not afraid of their own behavior. They're living, and this is a concept, right? It's called coram deo, right? I'll write it down. Latin concept. Right?
Got that, Eddie? That's your word.
I'm writing it down right here. Coram deo, right? Coram deo. And coram deo, it means living in the face of God. Nobody thinks about life that way. They don't think that you're living in the face of God all the time. But you are. Coram deo. God sees everything. And because they're not thinking about this, their behavior is not reflecting that. Right? So that's the first thing he's saying here. This is not a call to cause you to be afraid of losing your own salvation, right? Or losing what reward God has given you. This is a call to wake up Christians who are lax in their grace. Have we forgotten that we live in the face of God all the time? Coram deo, right? The face of God. So,
This is talking to Christians here, isn't it?
it's talking to Jews, right? Hebrews.
Believers, though.
Maybe some, because verse 2, for indeed the gospel is preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said. So some Christians, but maybe others who are not. A little bit of both. Okay, so